Okay, thanks for joining us today. Today we have with us Sean Elo-Rivera, a candidate for San Diego City Council District 9. We were supposed to have his opponent, Kelvin Barrios, with us, but a meeting that had been set up a long time ago, 6 weeks ago. He sent me an email at 9:51 saying, "Good morning, Matt. Thank you for the invitation to speak with your editorial board, but I have to respectfully decline at this time. I'll reach out with more information soon. I'm sorry for the late notice. My regards to the newspaper's editorial board, Kelvin Barrios." Again, 9:51 before a 10 o'clock meeting. I had also, for those watching this after the fact, I want to note that this is Yom Kippur, a very holy day in the Jewish calendar. And when I had scheduled this day and both candidates said that they could make it, I asked Sean if that was okay with him, knowing that, he is observant. And he wrote back to me saying, "I appreciate you noting that it's Yom Kippur on the 28th. I do typically observe the holy day, but we'll make the 28th work if necessary. Kelvin had repeatedly avoided community forums and endorsement interviews where he and I are together, and I don't want scheduling to be an excuse." So thank you, and my apologies that your opponent isn't here. A lot of the questions that I had were about his financial problems, his mismanagement or worse of his campaign fund, questions about an ongoing criminal investigation by the DA, by a potential newly discovered ethics violation about him working with a company that he had been talking to as a council member before he left. So I guess we'll leave some of those issues on the table, but I want to start with you by saying he has 13 political endorsements on his website, and now 3 of those have paused or pulled their endorsement. Georgette Gomez, who he used to work for, has paused her endorsement. And the mayors of National City and Chula Vista have pulled their endorsements. There are 13 officials on there, so 10 left. And, I was going to ask him which of those 10 he's talked to and whether they might pull their endorsements as well. But what do you think about, I want to kind of focus this question a little bit because I'm sure you could go on for a long time about your opponent. But there have been calls for him to resign as a candidate. There have been those endorsements pulled or paused in Georgette's case. But he also has a lot more fundraising than you have, and has an independent expense fund separate from his campaign of a couple $100,000 from labor unions that may spend on his behalf. So we could have a city council candidate elected with that baggage. What I just want to ask you personally, what does it feel like to run against a candidate with this much baggage? And keep it brief, I guess, because again, you could speak volumes about it.
It's frustrating, Matt. I mean, like today is frustrating because, and this is emblematic of it, right? I really, really believe in the democratic process. I believe that campaigns are supposed to be intensive job interviews for a really, really serious and important job. And since day one, I don't think Kelvin has treated this process in that way. There's been so much, since the beginning, seemed to be a can we, not should we. And I'm not going to even put that all on Kelvin, because much of what we are talking at, what you just mentioned, was known to others, and the opportunity to seize a seat was apparently enough motivation to look past or ignore the question of should we do this. That's incredibly frustrating. It's incredibly frustrating because the public deserves to vet us on our credentials and on the issues. And Matt, I get emails from people that say, or folks who reach out and say, well, your opponent's totally unacceptable. We're in your corner. That's not how I want to win this race. I want to win this race because people believe in the vision that I have, and because they believe that that I'm the best person for the job. And so that's just all super frustrating. Today is personally frustrating because, you know, I'm in the, I'm like 14 hours into fasting, you know, and I would be tuning in to a service. I'm not going to make myself out to be the most observant of Jews. This is like the day, right? And so I'm like kind of angry about today, even though I kind of expected it. But from a process standpoint, Matt, it's just really, really frustrating. It's frustrating because District 9 deserves better. They deserve a thorough vetting of the candidates. And I also do think that it's important to note that, you know, this isn't just on Kelvin. You know, the 13 folks who decided to endorse him, many of whom I do or did consider friends at one point. I think that there's some liability there. I think there's some liability with anyone who knows the importance of these jobs and decided to say, yeah, you know, why not?
And again, I appreciate you taking the time. We're going to, you know, keep it brief. And so thank you personally. Let me ask you about some of your issues. And I want to start with the essay that you wrote for us not long after the killing of George Floyd, when we asked all the candidates about defunding the police and where they stand on that. You said, you wrote something in your essay, San Diego, we need to listen. So it was, you know, it wasn't a laundry list of what you might or could do. It was more a promise and a pledge to listen to folks. So I'm just wondering, a question to you is, since that moment, who have you listened to? Which conversations have you begun or been a part of, you know, specifically, generally? And then I have some questions for you about the police budget and practices. But let's start there. You know, you said, San Diego, we need to listen. Who have you been listening to?
Yeah, well, you know, Matt, I think that's something that I've been trying to do for a long time. That the issue of racial justice and equity is not one that, you know, that just showed up the moment I was watching that the brutal murder of George Floyd. It's an issue that has been at the forefront of my work with the young folks that I work with at Youth Will. When we teach our young folks how to do policy work, we do that first through an examination. We do it in pursuit of equity. And in pursuit of equity, we have to first have a thorough understanding of the reasons for today's inequity. As we often say there, it's not happenstance that we are where we are today. And so what we do is we look back, we start with a piece by Ta-Nehisi Coates called The Case for Reparations, which lays out, you know, in a very, very powerful way, you know, why the current inequities of today exist. The young people I'm working with now who are working on a housing campaign, they do an examination of redlining and redlining specifically here in San Diego. So I'm not one, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea of naming names of people who I talk to, but I will tell you is that I try to engage the community on a regular basis to listen, to hear perspectives and experiences that I cannot say that I've personally experienced. Sometimes those are experiences that I can relate to, and other times they are unique. And that in that process, I'm continuously being educated. And in terms of action that I've tried to take, I think that late May and June were like, this has been such a wild race in so many ways, and the stakes rose as a result of COVID-19, and then the always simmering racial tensions that boiled over in late May and June really like focused me in an even more concrete way about the seriousness of this job and what is at stake when we think about the decisions that City Council can make and I can make in my current roles, right? So if that's, you know, even committing even more to ensuring that young people I work with on policy are always considering racial equity and justice. But then I also have some positions of leadership that I sit in now, right? And so I'm on the community college board of trustees. That's an elected position. I got to put my money where my mouth is, right? And so that started with a very, very strong resolution in June. And I know what people think of resolutions, that those are just words on paper. but I think we went further than most do in naming that we needed to root out the institutional and systemic racism within our institution and systems. And then we took action by reworking the district's board goals in such a way where we centered racial equity and justice explicitly on the front end, and then in explicit ways throughout the document. That is, kind of the guiding document of our district. As a member of the Regional Task Force on the Homeless, I made it very clear that I thought that the disparities that we see with respect to Black homelessness in San Diego, we needed to do so much more, and we couldn't just pretend like those disparities were going to go away magically. We needed to dig in deeper. And so the task force has convened, or is in the midst of convening, a special committee to focus specifically on the issue of Black homelessness in San Diego. I'm sure we will talk about this more, but that listening process is one that I'm going, is a daily activity. I am deeply committed to this, Matt. I think it is the project of our nation and of our city to get it right when it comes to race, and we are a long way from there. And the only way we're going to get there is with a firm commitment to doing so.
I appreciate that answer. On the police department, it's the budget is $566 million. It's about a third of the city's general fund. The police staff is about a third of the city's workforce. So, in this unprecedented fashion, hundreds of people flooded the city's phone lines when they were the council was considering the budget, asking for a smaller budget, asking in some cases for $100 million to be cut from the budget. Cutting $100 million would directly affect staff. I think about 85 or 86% of the budget is salaries and wages. So I guess specifically, do you support efforts to pare $100 million from the budget? And what would the budget look like with you on the council? How would you like to see it be drafted?
Yeah, I mean, I vividly remember that night. My wife Angela and I were in the car actually listening in, and poor her, right?
That's a good date night right there.
Yeah, right. Lucky Angela, she got to sit and listen to the budget hearing in the car. And she said, people were angry, right? And she said, you want to do this? And I said, this is why I want to do this. This is why. It's moments like this, right? And so, Matt, I will show up to city council having been an advocate and worked and an organizer who's worked with folks to make proposals and had stood on the other side of the dais and knows what it feels like to not be heard. So I'm not going to commit to a particular number today. I think that'd be grossly irresponsible on my part, not knowing exactly what the budget will look like, in June of next year. What I will say is this: is that process of building a better, more equitable, more just budget start on the first day of our tenure, and it will be a project that we will do with community in terms of identifying what it is that the community needs and wants, and where that sits in relation to the structural budget issues that are a problem here in San Diego, and the myriad of other variables that go into place in terms of structuring a budget. What I will also say is, and I've tuned into, I think, all of the other interviews. I think every single candidate who's running for mayor or for city council has said we were asking police to do too much, and I've had the same conversations with representatives from the police union, from folks who are officers, and I've yet to hear someone say, you know what, everything that's on our plate should be on our plate. We don't need to pare it down at all. So what I want to do is take a step back and do a thorough examination of the things that should and should not be on the plate of law enforcement. And I think that there's just kind of been this broad reference to community policing being something that we need to get back to San Diego being a national leader in community policing. I think that's a good line. I think that there needs to be a little bit more nuance to that. I think that, as I said in that essay, safety is a universal need, and it is very subjective in terms of how it is felt and what is required for us to feel it. And because of that, we need to do be much more intentional, much more thorough and engaging neighborhoods about what each neighborhood needs to feel safe. For some neighborhoods, that might mean police posted up on corners. For others, it might mean something very different. And I think that, again, going back to the listening portion, that will be a difficult process. I think it is one that will be at times very tense and emotionally draining, but it's one that is of critical importance to our city and our future. And if we go through that process in a thoughtful, intentional way, we will get to a place where the budget makes more sense to do the things that police need to do. So, you know, I know that this is going to be an incredibly important issue from day one. And it's one that I want to make sure we approach with the seriousness that it deserves, that we're not allowing catchphrases or the politicization of a very, very serious issue to cloud our judgment.
The other big change that's happened since we spoke last in the primary, obviously, as you referenced it, is the pandemic. Let me just ask you one question about that. And I'm wondering how the pandemic has shifted any of your views on transit and housing, particularly, the big discussion before the pandemic was dense housing close to transit. This was the way of the future. And now here we are in a budget, budget free fall. A lot of places making difficult decisions. How would you approach transit and housing if elected?
Yeah, so I think that the immediate and then the long-term impacts of COVID-19 and how it may affect both of those issues, right? So obviously we know right now that ridership is down and it's going to probably remain down so long as there isn't a vaccine. So that's just a reality that we're going to need to deal with. But I would also say that can't distract us from goals. And Chris, I'm anticipating your question now about a transit and investing in public transportation. I'm sure we'll get there. But we also know where we need to go in terms of climate goals, and we can't allow the immediate crisis to derail long-term goals. At the same time, Matt, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are in a time of increasing likelihood of epidemics and pandemics for a variety of reasons. And so we should be thinking through the ways to make our public transportation systems safer, more healthier. I think that this was a wake-up call for, as someone who's lived in other countries, this is a wake-up call for Americans that we probably should be adopting more practices from other countries in terms of mitigating the spread of disease and illness just on a day-by-day basis, right? I worked in Korea for a year as a public school teacher. I rode the bus every day, and it was very common to see people wearing masks on the bus. That was completely foreign to me, but obviously a really good practice. This was in 2010 and 2011 when I was there. A good practice that we probably should be adopting on a regular basis. Normalizing those sort of behaviors would be a good step to making sure that folks can ride transportation and feel safe. And as for housing, I'll be honest, Matt, I think a lot of the people who I've heard make the argument about, this is why we can't have density, were the same people who were saying we can't have density prior to the pandemic. And this has just seemed like a convenient pretext for making an argument that they, are hoping to win the day on. And so, again, we need to be cognizant of the risks that are there. I am well aware of the history of, housing and health being interrelated. The history of many public health and housing agencies comes from a time of density in urban areas, cities like New York, where disease was spreading rapidly in very, very dense communities. We've taken a big step forward, but I do think it's very much worth making sure that we are aware of that history and not forgetting about it. I don't think that these are mutually exclusive goals. I don't think density and public health need to be thought of as mutually exclusive. We just need to be conscious and aware. We need to be incorporating the best practices from around the world when it comes to mitigating disease spread. So I'm sure we can talk more about COVID-19. Many, many different ways this is impacting the community with respect to those two issues. That's where my mind's at right now.
How, as it relates to COVID-19, obviously communities of color have been disproportionately affected, Latinos especially. How, as someone who represents District 9, how have you been kind of service during the COVID-19 pandemic, and how would you, especially with communities of color and Latinos, work to make sure that they were protected, safe, had the information that they need. How would you approach that? And how did you in the last 6 months?
Yeah. So first, to address kind of the work that's been done, I'm really proud of the work that I've done with the young people that I work with. So in that role as the executive director of Youth Will, a big part of my job there is putting young people in position to create changes, to respond to crises in the ways that they see fit. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about what we've done there. They deserve all the credit, but I think that, I did play a role in positioning them. And so the first, we immediately convened community conversations with young people, which would have been a majority Latino because of the folks that we work with, to hear the ways that the community was being impacted, fears, concerns, challenges, et cetera. But also to talk about a vision, because whenever, again, I'm an organizer at heart, and I think that while we need to be in the organizing world, it is vital that we are brutally honest about the realities of the present, but also we're always talking about a better future that we can move toward. And so we had those conversations with young people, and then we started to act on that, right? And so one of the things that was very important to young folks was access to information. And this is a particular importance within the Latino community as well. We have folks that have bilingual homes, sometimes monolingual homes. We have families where young folks are sometimes bilingual and older generations are only speaking Spanish. So understanding those realities and making sure that we're getting the information out in a way that makes sense for the Latino community was very important. For us at Youth Will, the young folks created the idea of a emergency youth ambassador program. And this is something that's actually been replicated now by the county. And that put young people in the roles of doing direct outreach to other young people about information related to mitigating spread and of accessing emergency resources. I am so proud of the work that they did. They sent over, I believe, 25,000 text messages to young people throughout San Diego County. They connected with somewhere in the range of 4,000 young people. They held forums. That is the work that we were doing at Youth Will over the last several months. There's also the very, very important conversation that needs to be had about the way that, and this has been said over and again, but it can't be said enough, the crises like these lay bare the vulnerabilities of communities as a result of systemic and institutional inequity. And so with that in mind, we need to be using this moment to really be assessing why the increased rate of COVID-19 is present in the Latino community, and then what can we learn from that to make sure not just because COVID-19 it's here now, it'll be here for some time, but we also should be learning from this moment about how we can make sure that similar situations don't arise in the future. So again, this is something that it starts with listening. That's going to be always the way it works with me. We're going to start by listening, and then we're going to respond specifically to the needs of the community. One other thing that I want to mention is, sometimes there's these very, very big picture issues and big, broad ways that we need to address an issue. And sometimes through listening, from having proactive conversations, we can also learn more. And there's another campaign that our young folks worked on that I'm incredibly proud of. And it was a campaign to provide free menstrual products to folks at food distribution centers during the pandemic, to make sure that these essential needs are being met. Menstrual products are something that are often accessed by young women at their schools. When schools shut down, they no longer had access to those, and it was super important that we were making sure that need was met. So we've again partnered with the county to make sure that was happening, and it's actually a program that I think the county will be expanding over the next year as libraries and recreation centers open back up, to make sure that those products are in those locations.
Yeah. Before we go into specific issues, any broader questions board members want to throw out?
Housing. When we talked to you 8 or 10 months ago, whenever it was, you expressed frustration over how little progress had been made on housing. Since then, we've seen nothing new. The legislature passed no major legislation. The city is moving forward with a $900 million housing bond to build housing units that cost $400,000 or more, which is more than the average cost of a condo in Mission Valley. We have a fundamental strategy that doesn't work, and yet we keep doubling down on it instead of doing things like prefab housing or shipping containers. how would you break through this consensus that we should just keep doing what hasn't worked?
Yeah. Oh, Chris, I remember agreeing with you, way up in that office building, 10 months ago. And I agree with you today on that front about needing to look outside San Diego's, the borders of our city and our county to models that are working elsewhere. If we are serious about wanting to house everyone, we need to be serious about trying to house everyone. And that means bringing all options to the table and figuring out how we can reduce the costs to get homes built and people into homes. The one thing we differ on, I do think that Measure A, Homes for San Diegans, is an important step in that direction. But I think that we should be bringing as many options to the table as possible in how we spend that money and what gets built. I know that there's innovative models that are even being used in certain places here in California. Compton College, actually, very interestingly, is looking at the potential of using prefab housing for student housing for their on their campus. I think that they've actually even been in the conversations to make sure that those, because there's obviously concerns about what those jobs look like. We don't want to make sure that we're perpetuating poverty in the construction of homes for poor folks. But I actually don't think that that'll necessarily be the case. I think that we have such a housing shortage here in California that the idea of kind of mass production of housing is something that we certainly need to examine and can be a way to actually boost more people in the middle class by ensuring that there's good wages, good benefits, and proper protections for the folks who are doing the work of creating that housing. So, Chris, again, I agreed with you then. I agree with you now. We've got to put all these options on the table. We have a housing crisis. We've got to address it, period.
Anyone else?
Sean, I'd like to go back. You've been on the board of trustees with the San Diego Community College since 2018, right? Am I right? 2018? Right. And I want to just bring up a couple headlines to you to ask you if you knew about some of these things that were going on, specifically at City College. I'm going to stick to City. And before I ask the question, I want to disclose to you and whoever's watching that I retired from City College as a full-time professor in 2019, and I'm still teaching one online class. So I just want to disclose that to you. In 2019, there was a dean that left the college, walked out by the police and human resources under strange circumstances that were never really explained. In 2019, one of our reporters at the Union-Tribune, Gary Robbins, did an article talking about the steady declining enrollment at City under Constance Carroll, and that the fact that the budget has been over. And in 2017, you had a supervisor in the business office that was under investigation for paying herself an estimated $10,000. And she still works there and was supported by the president after that happened. So these are just a few. There's probably a couple more, but I don't want to give you a laundry list because I don't really know if you know about these issues. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know about them, my question is, why do you don't know about them? And if you did know about any of these, did you bring up any of these issues at board meetings, and what did you do to try to make the situation better?
Yeah, so if I can separate those out, they're like kind of three different things there. 2017, I'm not the specifics of that one. I'm not sure that I'm thinking of the same thing. And so because of that, especially because it was before my tenure, I'm going to jump ahead to the issue in 2019. It's a little bit delicate to discuss in a public interview because it's a personnel issue. But I will say that issues of this nature are of incredible importance to me. As a institution, as a public institution, we have a duty to the public to make sure that that we are holding our staff, even those in leadership, to the highest of standards. And what I've seen during my time on the board of trustees is, in those closed session meetings, without going into the specifics, is the spirit of those conversations is just that. There is no tolerance. Once we learn about the potential impropriety, there's no tolerance for that. We take our role incredibly seriously, and you know, this is one of the things that I've learned about sitting in elected office, especially when it comes to personnel issues. There's my personal beliefs. There are the ways that we are kind of allowed to speak about it publicly as a result of, you know, a variety of things, from, you know, workers' rights to different the potential legal ramifications, and that can at times feel like a bit of a bind, because my assumption is that from the public perspective, it looks like we're hiding the ball. That's super frustrating, right? Because I don't ever want that to be the case. I know how I show up in terms of, you know, prioritizing transparency and accountability. I understand why folks want to know more, and my commitment is to, you know, be as transparent as possible while also, you know, obeying the different requirements that we have in terms of respecting folks' personnel rights. So that's 2019. I do know what you're referring to, Laura. I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to speak to the specifics of it for the reasons I just mentioned. The report about enrollment, I think, is an important one. And look, first thing I'll say is, you know, Chancellor Carroll, who's retiring at the end of the school year, is nationally renowned and recognized as one of the preeminent chancellors in the community college system in our country. She's done an incredible job. If we were to look at the various community college campuses here in San Diego within our district and the continuing education campuses, the literal growth of you know, growing up of these campuses into beautiful facilities that are jewels of our community is you know, that on itself she should be very proud of. And then the performance of these institutions, I think, is something to be lauded as well. That being said, we have been struggling with declining enrollment. And I think that there's a variety of factors that we need to look at there. One was the strength of the economy. We know that in times of high employment, it is very common for enrollment to decline. We also know that this has happening within a broader context where young people, Gen Z, are more and more often hearing about the cost of college, about the trap that college has created for millennials like myself and Gen X. And as a result, many of those young people wrote college off. That is one of the reasons why I ran for a position on the community college board. That is devastating to me. Laura, as a member of the Latino community who is really proud of my educational attainment, hearing the next generation of young Latinos talk about not wanting to go to college because they weren't trying to rack up debt is incredibly, it breaks my heart. And all of those things are happening out in the community, right? And so City College draws from lower income communities who are often not in a privileged position to be able to forego the potential of income in order to pursue schooling. And right now, our system and society is set up in such a way where oftentimes that does feel like the choice. So it's something that we are looking at, that we are committed to correcting. My guess, Laura, is that we will probably see an uptick if, you know, based on the way the economy looks right now in enrollment. And then we need to do more to tighten the pipeline between the community college system, the K through 12 system, and the workforce and industry to ensure that we are drawing a direct pipeline into jobs. And that's actually, you know, kind of pivoting back to city council. I think that the city has a role to play in that way. I'll be really honest. I think the one thing that we are talking about that I've heard almost no one else who's running for city office talk about is the role that the city can and should be playing when it comes to improving education. That does not mean telling teachers how to teach or what to teach. It means not abdicating the responsibility for ensuring that every young person who grows up in San Diego has the education they need to be prepared to succeed and to work here in a good job in San Diego. I know that local industry would love to see our young people put on pipelines into you know the very solid middle to sometimes upper middle class jobs that exist in our community. And right now that pipeline just is not tight enough. I think the city has a role to play in that. I'm a proponent of creating an office for child, youth, and family success, which would be convening not just nonprofit organizations and service providers that deal with young people and families, but also would hope convene an annual meeting with San Diego Unified, the Community College District, and San Diego City Council to talk about areas for growth and ways to better partner. to ensure that we're not losing, we're not seeing declining enrollment, that we're making sure that the Promise program that we have at San Diego Community College District is an incredibly powerful program. And what it does is it opens the doors to college to everyone in our community. It's not well known enough about right now. I would say that the city has every incentive in the world to make sure that every single young person in San Diego knows that they can attend college for free. We're not doing that right now. I think the city has just said that's San Diego Community College District's job as it relates to K through 12. They punt it to San Diego Unified, and they never show up and ask, how can we help? How can we help you do better? And that's something that I would very much intend to take with me to City Hall.
Your description of how well San Diego Community College District is doing is at odds with the reforms that Jerry Brown got the legislature to push through 2 or 3 years ago that really ripped community colleges for not focusing like a laser on getting people to progress to get their degrees and on allowing people to just keep taking classes. So I'd be interested to see what your take on the reforms that the state government adopted because of the belief that community college districts were not high performing.
Yeah, so there's there's a lot to unpack there. First, I think that it's important to acknowledge that there is no less resourced, on a per student basis, no one gets less funding than the community college system. And that is, that might make sense to someone at first. Well, why wouldn't we invest the most in the UCs? But if we're thinking about this from the perspective of equity and who usually enters in community colleges, the idea that the funding would be so disproportionately skewed away from the community college students is troublesome. There's another part to that, Chris, that I think is important. The notion of like the 4-year college career, for many, many people, it has gone by the wayside for a variety of factors. I will use myself as an example. I'm now sitting, in front of you as an elected official with a JD who's passed the bar, right? Pretty solid academic credentials. But that was a non-linear path. I didn't go I didn't start at university, go for 4 years and go straight into law school. That is not what my journey looked like. It meant me going to community college for about 3 years, being a student athlete, stepping away, taking time off, working. I'm a first generation college student. I took a 5-year break. It took me longer to get through community college than it did to get through law school. I needed a place to find my footing. I needed a place to learn how to be a college student. And while we need to be sure that there's accountability and that we're encouraging, we're not perpetuating bad habits, at the same time, we need to be very aware of the monumental challenges that many students are facing, the responsibilities that they bear for their families, the well-being of their families, the economic well-being of their families. They're helping families pay rent. And what may seem like a student who's just kind of languishing in the community college system could be a student who is also helping put food on the table, who has had to take a step away from class or abandon a class and had to retake a class because of the challenges their families were going through. So Chris, I'm not going to for a second say the community colleges can't do better, that they shouldn't be trying to do better. But I think that it's really, really important to note the societal barriers that are being put in place in front of our students and the role that those play in terms of producing or limiting success. And that is why, again, pivoting back to city council, why I think it's so important for the city to show up in such a way where they're saying, look, we believe in San Diego's students. We believe in the high school students of today, of the college students of today. We believe that they have everything they need to be the workforce San Diego needs to become a world-class city. What can we do to help? And that question is not being asked right now. It's much easier to point out the flaws, to point at the negative statistics, and to show up. And this is what leadership is about. It's not just about pointing out problems. It's saying, how can we do better? How can we help you do better? And I think the city has to bear a responsibility with that. I think the state has a responsibility to bear on that front. And so I want us to do better, but I also want to make sure that we're taking into account the myriad of other factors that go into play when we talk about academic success.
Let me ask you a question about equity. You've clearly given a lot of thought to that issue, more than many of the candidates we've spoken with. So let me ask you the climate change, climate action plan question through the equity lens. I mean, obviously San Diego has a legally binding climate action plan. A lot of its benchmarks we're not hitting, so we're gonna have to figure out ways to get to the end goal while hitting these other marks. And I'm curious how you would approach that, given your focus and interest in equity and ensuring equitable outcomes. Energy obviously is expensive, and it becomes an equity issue pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you noticing that. I give this a lot of thought because it is of incredible importance to me. So on our website right now, the top issue that you would see is racial justice and equity. We put it at the top of our ballot statement as well. It's number one. And I'm explicit about it because we have to be. We have to be so intentional about it in order to get to the place where I want us to be. With respect to the climate action plan, I'm going to show up to, in assessing what the next version of the climate action plan looks like with the same lens that I'm going to show up with every single decision that I will make. And that is a lens where I'm considering how this advances racial justice and equity. That is a commitment that I have on our website. Our staff will be trained in doing that. And it's a thing that I will be very much demanding that the city do. In 2016, I took a trip with some San Diego leaders. This was just days after the election. 2 days after the election, we arrived in Atlanta at a conference called Facing Race. And it was a very heavy space to be in the days after Donald Trump's election. But it was also the perfect place to be in. And one of the things that the group that I was there with from San Diego listened to a presentation about was these racial equity trainings and these racial equity toolkits that can be used in assessing all policy proposals. And I think that is something that we should be absolutely incorporating into our assessment of the climate action plan. Really quick on that note, I think when it comes to the climate action plan, there's incredible opportunity there. And right now, the city is actually quite fortunate. The community leaders over the last almost 18, probably 15 months have been convening a large alliance of nonprofit organizations, labor unions, and other and companies around town to put together a vision for what they're calling the San Diego Green New Deal. And because of the work that they're doing, there's a lot of community engagement that has already happened that the city can then tap into in terms of improving and building upon the climate action plan. What I will say is this, is that those goals, and Matt, I've heard you repeatedly refer to the climate crisis as like the biggest challenge that we are facing. This is pre-COVID-19, but I think I haven't heard you say that you think it's any less important. And so with that in mind, what I know is this: those goals cannot be. We can't make the goals easier to attain just because we're not attaining them. We have to figure out how it is that we're going to hit the goals, right? Like same as with housing. So as I said with Chris, we're serious about reaching our housing goals because we believe that every person should have a roof over their head. Same thing with climate. We're serious about San Diego doing its part to mitigate the climate crisis, to make sure that we adapt and mitigate the impacts which are disproportionately felt by communities of color, particularly our Black community. Then we have to be sure that we are laser focused on achieving the goals, not diluting them, and putting equity at the forefront of that process.
With some of those thoughts in mind, what would your staff look like? How would it reflect the community? What thoughts do you have for who would be surrounding you?
Yeah, well, from a starting point, I'd want it to be a staff that reflects the community, that can engage with. And look, District 9 is diverse in every single way you can imagine, right? I mean, from the northern tip of the district at SDSU to the southern tip in Southcrest, bordering on National City, to the City Heights by itself, right, is just like an incredibly diverse place. And then the rest of District 9, it really adds to that. And so we're going to need a staff that has the cultural and linguistic ability to meet people where they're at, to engage people in their spaces, to have a nuanced understanding of why it is a community may or may not feel comfortable engaging with the government. And I'm very, very committed to that. And I think that my background doing the work that I've done here in District 9, both at free legal clinics, my time at Mid-City CAN, and the work that I do now with young people gives me a really good window into what that team would need to look like in order to do that work. And the other thing that I want to make a point of saying is this: it's not just a matter of them, having the right backgrounds in terms of language and culture, but also the professional capacity to do their work effectively and with integrity. I will say that my staff will be held to the highest standards when it comes to their adherence to the city's ethics rules. I would demand that my team model where we want the city to be as a whole. So that part of staffing is incredibly important. I'm actually very glad you asked that, because I think it's a very important question that is not asked often enough. I'm proud to be someone who's running for office who actually has the experience of managing a team, of hiring, of firing, managing payroll. I think that's really important. The notion that the first time a person would ever have a supervisory role would be as a council member in one of the nation's largest cities is quite shocking to me. And we don't even really consider that. And then we wonder why City Hall looks the way it does. There shouldn't be a surprise there. And look, I'll also say this: I have a lot of friends who work on city council staff who are capable and dedicated and very, very interested in doing their best for the public. And at the same time, I think that we need to make sure that we're electing folks to these positions who have a track record of getting the job done when it comes to leading a team.
How that segue into my next question, and I think maybe some of your management expertise will play into this answer perhaps, but make the case for us that 101 Ash Street would not have happened on your watch, that you would have seen a red flag, said something, done something, or is the culture at City Hall so systemic that you wouldn't have seen or said anything, and that as-is contract would have floated through the process? Were you there to take part?
Yeah, well, I don't think I can say that it wouldn't have happened, because that seems like a very easy thing for me to say as a candidate. Like just me being there by myself would have solved the whole thing. I do know how I approach important and big decisions, and the homework that I do, and that I don't just accept the default acceptance of a recommendation from staff is a gross dismissal of your responsibilities as an elected official. Those are recommendations, right? And there is definitely plenty of space to ask challenging questions, to thoroughly analyze things, critically analyze things, and pay the proper respect and deference to staff for the hard work that they're doing to bring things forward. For too long, Matt, from what I've seen, it's either one or the other. We're either disparaging staff or we're just completely deferring to them. And good Lord, that cannot be the way that we do our work as elected officials. Right? Our job is to thoroughly vet these things. It's to ask tough questions. I've been in closed session. It's to really challenge folks in those spaces and make sure that we're asking the questions that need to be asked, that we're doing our own homework. This one's particularly egregious, and if I can tell you why it's so upsetting to me, it's not. There's like the dollar and cents part of this particular deal that is like just outrageous. But it's the way that it further erodes the public's trust in the city. And the things that we are talking about wanting to do, solving the homelessness crisis, meaningfully addressing climate change, getting to where we need to go with the transportation system. We've got over $1 billion backlog on stormwater. And there's this terrible situation that we're in here in San Diego, where whether I'm talking to a far left Bernie supporter or someone waving a Trump flag, the one thing that they have in common is that they don't trust San Diego to get the job done in an effective way or to be looking out in their best interest. And that is, as a proud progressive who wants to do San Diego to do big, bold things and for us to grow up into a world-class city, that is profoundly disappointing to me. And so step one is making sure that we've earned the public's trust to do those big, important things. And we're not going to do that so long as we're just rubber stamping bad deals that end up costing the public millions of dollars.
How a follow-up on sports arena, and that's essentially what you'll be asked to do. The mayor has picked a project. He's going to package that project. He's going to give it to the council next year. Are you there to rubber stamp and move that along? What do you think about the process so far? How would you handle that deal?
Right. So, well, first of all, I'm certainly not there to rubber stamp it. And anyone who's electing me to do any rubber stamping of any sort, I'm probably not your candidate. The bigger question about this particular project, I've read your op-ed and I agree. I don't get to say whether or not the mayor how he moves forward between now and election day, right? What I do get to determine is how critically I will analyze that, how I will encourage my colleagues to critically analyze the deal before us and to make sure that there's high expectations, that every T is crossed, that every I is dotted, and that San Diego has gotten the best deal possible. I think that we need to be, and again, I don't think that these ideas are mutually exclusive. Especially during COVID-19, certainty is a really important thing for industry, and having an environment where deals look like they've been set and then they're pulled back and we're resetting, that could be a red flag for folks who want to do business with San Diego in the future. And so before I just automatically default to saying I'm throwing out whatever deal the mayor brings us, I think that that's equally irresponsible. And the commitment is simply that I will, critically analyze this and make sure that San Diego is getting the best deal it can possibly get.
And where are you on the height limit?
I'm in support of the measure.
Okay.
Changing it?
Yes, lifting.
You pointed out your district is one of the most diverse in the city. It's also where a lot of the most affordable housing is, and I'm wondering about in your efforts for equity and housing everybody who wants it. In your words, you said everybody should have a place to live. How do you avoid the concerns about gentrification, where the improvements that you plan to make don't price the people who already live there out of their own communities? And that's both businesses and residents.
Yep. When I interviewed with you all back last November, I had shared with you, and I vividly remember the conversation. It was a community leader, Delia, and she's lived in City Heights for decades and pours her heart and soul into improving this community. And her she cried, right? The idea of being priced out of this community was devastating, is devastating to her. So Andrew, it's gotta be at the forefront of our mind, right? And I think there's two parts to that. One is recognizing, and it might be some uncomfortable conversation with my future colleagues, that it cannot simply be the case that all affordable housing continues to go in the same communities it's always gone in, right? We've just got to acknowledge that, is that the city as a whole is going to have to bear the responsibility of making sure that there are homes for everyone everywhere. Now, with respect to making sure that what is built here is accessible and affordable to those who currently live here, part of this is just having a commitment to being intentional about it from the front end, of not, letting a project get, to the 10-yard line and then saying, oh, wait, what about the possibilities of displacement and gentrification? It's thinking about this at all times and taking that into concern. I will also say, as kind of a bigger issue related that is connected to this, part of why this is so challenging is that many times when it comes to housing, we're trying, and Chris, we probably have very different opinions about the solution to this, but I think we're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when it comes to, we've got a system right now which essentially is completely dependent upon access to private capital, and we're trying to make a housing that is affordable, and the numbers just don't add up far too often. I currently sit on the board of Community Housing Works, which is a nonprofit affordable housing developer. So we've all but written out, profit from the equation there, right? I mean, it's a nonprofit organization, and it's still incredibly costly to build affordable housing, and we have to, you have to take into account the potential for gentrification there. One other quick thing, Andrew, if I can talk about when it comes to affordable housing in District 9 in particular, is the importance of making sure that we do so in such a way that takes into account the special and unique aspects of District 9 and the families who live here. We have many multi-generational families, and so Community Housing Works actually has an affordable development that has many more bedrooms than you would typically see in an affordable unit, because there's multi-generational families who live there. And so I think that if we are, if we have a nuanced understanding of our community, if we're engaging community in a meaningful way from day one, and are making sure that we are intentional about building to the needs of the current community, we can get there. We can achieve those housing goals without necessarily displacing the folks who have made District 9 the great place that it is.
And what about the businesses, though? I forget, we had someone last week talking about a neighborhood that they improved, saying, well, we got rid of the car dealerships, we got rid of the junkyards. Those are businesses that in any other city, you need to have those businesses. How do we avoid displacing them in the process as well?
Yeah, so I think that part of this is going to be like, as we start to think about developing up, right, and having multi-use development in a more common way here in San Diego. I think that the choices between some of those businesses will not, it won't always either be one or the other. There are other businesses that we may need to consider, how appropriate they will be close to housing. But in those situations, Andrew, I think that being fair to those business owners and making sure that they are, properly compensated for their property, is going to be super, super important. That they're not bullied into selling. That's going to be very important. There's a way to do these things to do these things right. I think about the neighborhood of Rolando, which they have when I knocked on a lot of doors myself in the primary. I think that's just like the best way in the world for a candidate, a potential public servant, to be educated about a neighborhood is to actually do the work of knocking on doors. And in Rolando, the folks who live closest to University Avenue, house after house after house, they had concerns about homelessness that was moving into their neighborhood from University Avenue, and about some of the businesses that were there, and would love to see that the stretch of University Avenue that is adjacent to their neighborhood revitalized. So I think that, again, when community comes together and works toward a vision, they can solve many problems and do it in a way that has that really does work for the vast majority of people.
Speaking of business, could you talk about what more you think the city should do to get business and the economy back on track after the pandemic?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Christy. I think so. COVID-19 is devastating, and it's been tragic from a health perspective. It's been tragic from an economic perspective. But we're also learning a lot, right? And I think that one of the things that, especially as Democrats, we need to have some humility about are the ways that red tape and regulation were inhibiting potential opportunities for innovation and growth from businesses. And so suddenly, since COVID-19 showed up, it's become much easier to try things, to innovate. And I think that we need to lean into that. I think we need to encourage that spirit of innovation here in San Diego. I would also say that the things that we are identifying as working, we should be pushing more chips toward, right? So outdoor dining is kind of the easy one to think of because it's right in front of us. But y'all, is there a place that you've ever been that is better suited to outdoor dining and entertainment than San Diego? I've lived in multiple countries. I've traveled quite a bit, and I mean, this is something that we should definitely be leaning into. And I think that that's a good example of the ways that we're doing that. I also think that we should be thinking about ways to protect. So there's a few different things here. We don't know for sure about whether or not there will be another flare-up. And so and it's gonna be a while before we're out of the woods with COVID-19. And so with that in mind, I think that one of the things that we need to do is be protecting against further devastation by making sure that there's automatic policy triggers in place, where the protections that were put in place in the spring to help mitigate the damage to businesses, to help ensure that we had as few businesses close their doors as possible, that we can provide them those business owners the certainty of knowing that if there is another full lockdown, automatically triggers will go into place, that their protections will be there, and they're not sitting and waiting on city council to take action. So there's that kind of mitigation of impact. And then again, as we get back on our feet, it's leaning into the things that we're learning now, and it's really making sure that we're listening to community and to business owners about what they need in order to thrive.
I'm wondering if the pandemic has shifted your thinking in any way on the 5 big moves of Hassan Rokrada at Sandag, either the scope or the timing of that $177 billion plan?
Yeah, well, I mean, so the timing of when that would come to voters, perhaps, it'll depend on where we're at when that does come to voters, if it comes to voters. Matt, I think what's of more concern to me when it comes to the big 5 moves, I like the vision. It excites me. I think that I was excited to see a big, bold vision for San Diego, because so often we seem to aim small. But what we're seeing there right now in Sandag as an institution is the exact sort of thing that undermines the public's trust. And that is that is a lot of money to ask for if folks can't trust us. And so we've got to make sure that Sandag's house is in order in such a way that people can feel confident in that they're investing in an institution that's going to do right by them. And it would be hypocritical of me to have said that one of the reasons we should have opposed Measure A back in 2016 was because we couldn't trust Sandag to keep their word, and then not just because I like Hassan's vision to not hold them to the same standard now. You know, that wasn't about Gary Gallegos versus Hassan. It was about, you know, how the institution was behaving and acting, what we were seeing, you know, right before our eyes. And you know, I am really, really big on consistency. If you all got to know me well, you would know that hypocrisy is something that I just can't with. It really, really gets me going, and especially from the folks who are on my side. This is on my side of the political aisle. I cannot tell you how frustrated I get when I see, you know, local Democrats making, you know, big, bold statements about their frustration with Senate Republicans when they're not willing to keep their house in order here locally. That is, it completely erodes our argument for consistency and that our statements are about anything more than pure politics if we're not willing to hold our own and those we like accountable when it comes to ethics, transparency, and integrity.
We probably have time for a couple more questions if board members want to throw those out. I can keep talking. I just want to know real quick on the police commission, you're a yes or no? You're a yes, right?
I'm a yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we go ahead and give you 2 minutes for a closing statement.
I appreciate you all taking the time to interview me again. You know, the circumstances are what they are in terms of it just me being here. I don't need to tell you all how important this election is. This is a critical moment for San Diego. I believed that 10 months ago when I sat before you. The stakes have become monumentally greater. And we have a real opportunity here in San Diego to take a step forward toward being the world-class city that I think so many of us see as a potential for us, but have been frustrated that we have, you know, not fully embraced yet. And that world-class city is one where everyone is housed, where we are a leader when it comes to addressing climate change, where we have a public safety system that really does make everyone feel safe, and where educational and economic opportunity is abundant for people from every single neighborhood. And all of that is happening within the context of a pursuit of racial justice and equity that makes San Diego proud and makes us a model for the nation when it comes to addressing those long overdue needs when it comes to racial justice and equity. And I really do think that I am a person who has the qualifications and commitment to do that job well. I want San Diego to be that place. I thoroughly love this city and this community, and I will put my heart and soul into helping us get there. I want to do it in a way that moves San Diego past some of the intransigence and frustrating habits that we have, and into a future where we really are becoming a model city for the world. I would be honored to have your endorsement. I would be honored to serve on city council. I think I will be a good council member. I look forward to you all holding me accountable to everything I said here and every day that I'm on the job. And I appreciate everything that you're doing. And again, I thank you for your time.
What was the last time you went to Super Cocina?
Yesterday.
What'd you get?
Funny enough, my team had canvassed and they had met there for lunch. I was running a little bit late, so I had to watch them eat, Chris, which was you know, the worst. And I was going to get a Jamaica and I couldn't even get that because the line was too long. So my last trip to Super Cocina was one that made me want my next trip to be as soon as possible.
That's funny. Sean, thanks again for taking the time during the fast on Yom Kippur. I want to again apologize that your candidate, your opponent, didn't make it after setting the date. So I personally apologize to you and thank you for taking the time today.
And definitely not your thing to apologize for, but I do appreciate that. Matt, if I can actually really quick before we end,
Sure.
Jeff Lights, what you all put in the paper yesterday, I believe it was yesterday. I think that was really important. And I just want to acknowledge and appreciate the UT for doing that. Reparations are at the top end of our racial equity and justice plan. And you all modeled what it means to acknowledge transgressions of the past so that we can move forward to a better future. And I think that is very commendable. I appreciate you all doing that and I hope that the city can follow your lead.
Thanks a lot, Sean. That's much appreciated.